Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemirovsky, and I'm your host. None of the Above is a political show, and we're focused on two words, the two most heinous words in American politics today, dysfunction and polarization. Our system is dysfunctional beyond belief and polarized beyond belief. So the focus of this show is to talk about how we got there, what this dysfunction is about, what this polarization is about, and more importantly, to come up with solutions. How are we going to break this cycle of dysfunction? For today's show, we're going to start a topic that I think is probably the number one topic on most people's minds when they think about what's wrong with the political system today, and that's campaign finance. Most people abhor the amount of money that gets spent on politics, and I think most people suspect that it is the root of all evil in politics. Now, of course, another saying is that money is the mother's milk of politics. So we're somewhere between the purity of the mother's milk and the evil of the money here. But it is a big issue, it's a big topic, and it's a serious topic. And if, at some point, if we don't get our arms around the problems related to campaign finance, we will not be able to deal with dysfunction, and we will have continued polarization. So we're going to start today as a two-part interview. In today's session, we're going to talk about background on campaign finance, why it's a problem, how we got there, some of the Supreme Court decisions that have led to, again, some of this function in the political world today. And then in our next episode, our next program, we're going to talk about some solutions. So today's the problem, the next episode will be the solutions. We also are going to introduce another topic today that we're going to talk about periodically, and that is incumbency protection. How the people that we elect to office, how the incumbents use campaign finance, and how they use other vehicles to, quite frankly, keep their jobs, how they use their power and their influence to create the process that allows them to stay elected. So we'll start with campaign finance reform, and then we will drill down to a subset of incumbency protection. Welcome back. As we said earlier in the show, perhaps one of the most controversial topics that it would be at the top of anyone's mind when you think of why the system isn't working, why we have all this dysfunction, ties back to campaign finance. If you ask the average person on the street, I think what bothers them most about the system, they'll tell you it's campaign finance. So we're going to start a two-part conversation today. The first part is going to be to examine kind of how we got here, what the main problems are, and then in the second part come back and talk about some solution sets. One of the things we always want to do on None of the Above is present solutions and options to hopefully deal with these situations. We're very lucky to have with us today Peter Wallison. In the world I travel in, which is the political world and the world of journalism and newspapers, for my money, he's an absolute rock star. Maybe not Britney Spears rock star like for my daughters, but he's a rock star. He holds the Arthur F. Burns Chair in Financial Policy Studies for the American Enterprise Institute. But among other things, I think Peter is as well known as anybody and as well written as anybody in understanding the financial crisis and the Great Recession. He is very knowledgeable because he spent a lot of his time in government. In fact, Peter, I'm realizing we could take up the whole 20-minute segment here on your career, so I'm going to shorten it a bit.
Good.
But I admire anyone that's spent time in government. I know we think it's dysfunctional, and it is dysfunctional, but the people working within government are a very hard-working group, and the people that have worked at the level that Peter's been at are incredibly brilliant. They're great at what they do. They're smart, and they're working to solve problems. We don't always feel that, but that's what they're doing. Peter served under President Reagan,
yes,
as Counsel of the President, and also served as General Counsel of the U.S. Treasury.
Yes.
I don't think you could have more eminent qualifications for what you do and what you represent. But we're going to throw a curveball today, because when I think of Peter and I think of his great work, I think of the financial crisis, I think of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and all the things you understand. But he's a very prolific writer, and somewhere along the way, he took a step back to write about campaign finance. And the book is called Better Parties, Better Government. So welcome, Peter Wallison.
Well, thank you,
and
Steve.
As I said, I had to cut the show short. That's not working either. I had to cut the show short. Say that 10 times fast to get through all your credentials. So welcome, and it's so great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, you, Steve. And I'd love to talk about campaign finance reform. It's a real vacation from the financial crisis in 2008.
Well, you must have taken a vacation to write the book. How do you have this whole world you live in, and then you just stop one day and say, I'm going to switch gears and move over to campaign finance reform?
Well, I was asked to be on a committee of the New York Bar Association on campaign finance. And at the time, there was another person on that committee by the name of Joel Gora, who was my co-author. Okay. Joel is a well-known lawyer. He's a professor at Brooklyn Law School and a member of the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Commission, Union, ACLU. And he's been a student himself of campaign finance for many, many years. And it turned out, as we were both on this commission, that we agreed tremendously between the two of us. And I thought to myself, this is wonderful. He's a member of the ACLU. I am a Republican, a conservative, and we agree on campaign finance reform. Why is that? And is there a way for us to get together and discuss why we both view this issue the same way? And so we sat down in whenever it was, 2007, I think, and decided to write this book, and it was published in 2008.
Why was the Bar Association concerned with campaign finance reform?
Well, the New York City Bar Association has lots of subjects that they cover, and they set up these ad hoc committees of members to talk among themselves, to debate issues, and then perhaps to write a report of some kind. And Joel and I happened to be on that committee. There were only maybe 7 or 8 people on the committee. We met for about 6 months every month in New York, did a little bit of side research on our own, and then wrote a report. And Joel and I had, it turned out, exactly the same views. And why is that? And it turns out that Joel, and this should not surprise anyone from being a member of the ACLU, he is very strong on the First Amendment. He believes, as I believe, and this is where our joint views coincide, I believe that there's nothing more important in the First Amendment than providing as much information as we can to voters before an election. And what has happened, as we'll hope we will get into, what has happened over the years with campaign finance reform was the opposite. It was to deny voters as much information as could be done, because campaign finance reform is very favorable to incumbents. And who is making the laws on campaign finance reform? It's the incumbents. And they have been very fortunate because they've been supported in many respects by the press. And why is that? And that is because, to the extent that other sources of information to the public are limited, restricted in any way, the press has more power to influence what happens in public policy. So
that could be the sequel to this book, the press element. You don't really cover the press element.
We don't enough. We mention it in the in there the fact that this is really in the interest of the press to endorse as much campaign finance restrictions as they can in order to keep information from getting to the public from any source other than the press. And that actually has been the history of campaign finance. So Joel, who actually argued some of the major cases in the Supreme Court and in lower courts, and I wrote this book in 2008, 2007, and 2008 in order to make clear what we thought about campaign finance and what could be done to make it better. There are really 2 things here, Steve, that I want to emphasize. The first, I think, is that I am a very strong partisan of political parties. And I was interested to hear you saying before we got on the air that you're interested in a third party.
Right.
I think the problem is that the 2 political parties do not have enough power. Many people look today at what is happening in Congress, in the House and the Senate, and they are disgusted with the fact that there is so little agreement between the parties. They're so partisan. And the Republicans who come from parts of the country which are largely conservative will not compromise with the Democrats who come from parts of the country that are mostly liberal, and they actually can't. One of the reasons that is true is not, as many people say, redistricting within the states. That's part of it. One of the reasons it's true is that the parties have very little control over the people who are actually serving in office. And one of the reasons they have so little control is that they do not finance campaigns. They cannot finance campaigns. I would say that every one of your listeners would be surprised to learn that the political parties cannot finance the candidacies of their candidates, that the candidates have to raise the money themselves. The parties raise money, but the only substantial amounts that they can provide to the candidates, it turns out to be about 1% of the cost of a candidate's election. That small amount is limited by law. So the parties cannot actually help their candidates. The result of that is that the parties are not selecting people in various districts who could get elected. The interest of parties is to gain power by electing a majority in the House and the Senate. But they don't have the power to make sure who gets the nomination in a particular congressional district or in a state for the Senate. And they don't have the power because they can't provide the financing. It's the individual candidate who provides the financing. Now, I've only covered a little bit of this subject.
Right.
Why don't you ask me?
I think your introductory comments are indicative of really how complex this whole topic is. And you glossed over a few things, and again, this is an educational program too, that maybe we should drill down a bit before we move on. When you talk about the financing, et cetera, there's a dichotomy between what they call hard money and soft money.
Right.
Right? And the parties are on the soft money side.
No.
Or they're on the hard money side.
Hard money.
Okay, so why don't we walk through that?
Okay.
Hard money versus soft money, and where the players fall on that side of either side of that line.
The candidates themselves and the parties are limited to accepting and using only hard money.
Okay, which again is?
And that is, it's an individual restriction. You cannot give more than $2,400. I think that's the amount now. It's adjusted for inflation, and I think the number is now about $2,400 to any candidate. And you are limited in the amount that you can give to hard money that you can give to a political party or to a political committee of the party. Those numbers change almost daily because they're all adjusted for inflation, but they are small. In any event, though, the parties and the candidates are the only ones that can use, that are limited to hard money, and they can only use that hard money. The soft money, what you're referring to, are unlimited contributions that can be made to political action committees of various kinds, 527s, super PACs, various organizations under the Internal Revenue Code or under state laws that are permitted to solicit funds, sometimes disclosing who their donors are, sometimes not, but in unlimited amounts and not limited to the $2,400 for each.
Right, and these limits, this hard money, that's the money that's used to basically say, vote for Joe, vote for Carol, vote for somebody. The actual, I want your vote expenditures.
Yes.
The soft money side is a little soft in how you can, but that's not targeted towards the candidate. It's more of an issue-based or get out the vote or things like that. It's not tied to vote for me.
That's right. In fact, the only distinction between hard money and soft money is that hard money is the only money that can be used to say vote for Joe Smith.
Right.
And if you say vote for Joe Smith, then it has to be said only with hard money.
Which is the limited sources of, as you said, an individual can give so much, a PAC could give so much. So there's limitations on the amount of money that can be given on the hard money side, basically little, if any, limitations on the soft money side.
That's right. And so that represents a tremendous difference for parties as a group and these outside organizations that are like 527s and super PACs and so forth, who have much more money than the party. But even within the restrictions that the party has in financing its candidates, it is limited to a small amount of hard money that it can actually give to its candidates. A candidate for Congress, for example, can get only $5,000 from the Republican Party if he's running as a Republican, or the Democratic Party, $5,000. Direct contribution. Then there is something called coordinated money. That is, the party and the candidate can coordinate what they do, and that's something like $42,000. That amounts to about 1% of what it costs to run for Congress.
So again, and we're going to get to the solutions at the end, but where you agreed with your co-author is that the parties need to be able to have more of a say, more involvement in this. And right now, they're limited to the hard money side, and on the hard money side, they're greatly limited to even that level of participation.
That's right.
So they're narrowed. They're put in this little tiny box in
That's
terms
right.
of what they can do.
And why is that? And this is the thing that the book stresses so much. Why are the parties limited? Why did Congress, when it developed campaign finance law, why did it limit that? And the answer is, it's very helpful to incumbents. And when you think about it, of course, it becomes obvious. And that is, an incumbent has a myriad ways that he or she can introduce himself to his constituency. He has a franking privilege. He gets on television, on the local news all the time whenever he makes a statement of some kind. He goes around the district for the 2 years that he is, after he's been elected until the next election, to all of the county fairs and bar mitzvahs and other events that occur in his district, and he becomes very well known. There's name recognition for the person who's the incumbent. What about the challenger? Where does he get the money? That's the problem. Right. And what Congress knew when it established the campaign finance laws was that if the candidates themselves had to raise all the money, then it was going to be much easier for the incumbent to raise the money. He's already well known. He already has introduced himself to all of the interests who would be interested in his vote. He's known to people in the district, and they might be contributors also. But the challenger, how does he start out? And in fact, he starts out with nothing in most cases. He can't get anything from his party, or at least anything substantial.
Very narrow range, right?
Very narrow range. So he has to not only make himself well known, which is the incumbent already has done, but he's got to raise the money from the very beginning of the campaign. So if the campaign begins the year before the election, which is rare, it usually begins about 4 to 6 months before the election, the poor challenger who has finally gotten the party's nomination and is ready to run against the incumbent has to now start soliciting funds from people in the district and people he knows throughout the country in order to put up any kind of campaign against the incumbent. And so since the campaign finance reforms went into effect in 1974, and they've been amended a little bit
right.
since then, the advantage of the incumbent over the challenger has risen. It was almost 1-to-1 before the campaign finance reforms went into effect. Now it's 5 or 6 to 1.
Right, and you say 1-to-1, the amount of money that was being raised.
The amount of money that each of them could raise
now
is
the
almost
incumbents,
1-to-1.
what they're raising is just so huge.
Huge compared to what the challengers are able to raise. And even more important is that even when it's 5 or 6-to-1, the 1 for the challenger is late money. After he's worked or she's worked for months to raise the funds, it finally starts coming in, probably in September, maybe in October. The election's in November.
Over.
The game is virtually over.
Right.
So for that reason, we have a system in this country where the incumbent is almost always elected. And so if you follow politics as you do, Steve, you know that the newspapers cover the fact that a single congressman, maybe not even a well-known person, but a single congressman has decided that he wants to spend more time with his family. Right. And he leaves office, and they say that. So that opens a spot in Iowa for the Republicans or the Democrats, depending on whether that congressman who departed is either one of those. Why is that so important? Well, when both candidates are starting off unknown, neither is an incumbent, each party has a better chance to win. So, one of the reasons we have these situations where the incumbents are in place, they are the only ones who the people in their district know, they are re-elected in every case, they don't have to worry too much about opposition. Right. And so they tend to stay right within the most conservative or most liberal elements of the district, the people who come out to vote in the primaries and assure them then of re-election by nominating them for the party's nomination.
And that's where I think your book has such an interesting and different aspect, a different prism to focus on this whole problem. The average person on the street, and I'm overgeneralizing, they think of campaign finance reform. They say the system's rigged, people are buying votes, they're buying power, they're buying influence, the evil lobbyist thing going on here. You're looking past that. You're saying that's not even, in fact, in your book, you have research that shows that the money really doesn't lead to votes in that respect. Maybe could you focus on that for a second?
Money is extremely important.
Right.
But
it's not showing up in the outcome of the voting that the candidates are making when they're elected.
Well, it actually shows up a little bit. What it shows,
but not to the extent that the average person is outraged, thinking that
that's right.
the money is yielding the voting results, as opposed to you said it's yielding the incumbency protection results.
Protection. Right. That's right. The voting results are really a much different thing.
Right.
And people are outraged because what the press says is that, well, Congressman X received such and such contributions from the oil industry. And sure enough, he's voting in the way that the oil industry would want. Well, they never present the opposite point of view, which is the reason he's getting the money from the oil industry is that he has come into office voting in favor of the oil industry, and so they're supporting someone who supports their positions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Everyone would say that's fine. If you think, however, that the oil industry is buying Congressman X's vote by making a contribution to him, well, then it looks a lot different. But the important point here, actually, is the fact that Congressman X has to go to the oil industry and ask for money. That's the point that I've been trying to make from the beginning, and that is if the party was the principal fundraising element,
then that wouldn't be happening.
And they made the contributions to their candidates, whether it's a challenger or an incumbent, there's much less of that appearance of corruption where the candidate has been required to solicit funds from an interest group of some kind.
And that's, again, I think what's so fascinating about your book, and when people read it, it breaks through this veneer that's out there of what people think the real problem is, and it starts focusing in a different direction, this notion of incumbency protection.
That's right.
Now, in the beginning, you started talking about the Supreme Court. They're not doing you many favors, because since your book was written, they keep going in the opposite direction. We have the Citizens United case, and we have the Speech Now case, so they're not working with you. They're working against you.
Not for parties. No, they're not. In fact, the two cases that they've handled, which were called Colorado 1 and Colorado 2, as a matter of fact, because the state of Colorado was involved in both of them, the Supreme Court, by 5 to 4.
I didn't know that, but both Colorado-based cases. Okay.
Yeah. It was a Colorado group that brought the case.
Okay.
In both cases, the Supreme Court, by a 5 to 4 majority, I must say it's the the liberals on one side, the Republicans were in the minority on this. In both cases, the Supreme Court held that contributions to parties could be limited by Congress, and not only the contributions to parties could be limited, but also the use by the parties of coordinated funds with their candidates could also be limited. So the parties are limited in a way that the organizations outside the political system, the 527s, the super PACs, those people who are raising unlimited funds for a variety of, because there are a variety of laws that permit them to do so, it gives them much more influence than the parties have. Because the parties...
And all in the name of free speech, though.
All in the name of free speech. And here's where it all comes together on the First Amendment and the issue of free speech. Because what is the First Amendment for? We have all kinds of disputes about whether some publication is pornographic or not, and whether a person can insult another person in the newspapers, and whether that is a libelous or a slanderous action for which he will be civilly liable. Those issues all involve the First Amendment, and they're hard fought on both sides. But the essential element of the First Amendment is to give the voters as much information as they can possibly have so they can make the right decision in electing their representatives, electing the president, the senators, and the congressmen. And so the reason Joel Gora and I came together so well is that he has been a First Amendment partisan for his entire career. And his view is that there ought to be as much information available, as much money as possible, as anyone wants to spend, to provide more information to the public, to the voters, before an election, to make sure the voters get as much information as they can possibly absorb, is the way the First Amendment was intended to work. And the campaign finance system goes in just the opposite way, because it attempts to limit the amount of information the voters can get by restricting the amount of money that candidates and parties can use to advertise what their candidate will do if he or she is elected.
So it's not as much about the money as how the money gets used, and again, it gets used so narrowly on the one side, and then within the party structure, even more narrowly. You want to open that up and free that up a bit so that the money can be spent differently and in a way that would promote competitiveness and break down this incumbency protection.
Exactly. If we had more challenging elections where incumbents were not always elected, we would have a much different Congress. And furthermore, we would have better people in Congress. You have to think about it this way too. A whole lot of people who are really high quality people, they are successful in their businesses, they are successful lawyers and doctors and people in the media and so forth. They don't want to be in politics because they know what that means is they have to go to everyone they know and beg for money in order to put on any kind of acceptable campaign against an incumbent. Very hard to do. Whereas if the parties were there to finance people, many people who are otherwise reluctant to enter the political system, who are very high quality and very intelligent people, would be willing to do it because the party will stand behind them, provide them with the money to run a good campaign.
And I think at the end of the day, that's probably the most frustrating thing for the average citizen to say, this is the only choice I get. I only have a choice between A or B, and I don't like A or B.
Right.
In fact, I want none of the above. Right? Well, anyway, this has been a very good start to our conversation. We see how fast time flies when we're
is it all
having a
over
chat.
already? All
over already for the first segment. We're going to have to turn this into 10 segments. I was going to do 5, but it's really 10. 10 segments. So we'll break here, and then we'll regroup and come back with segment 2 in another show.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that first segment on campaign finance. And again, if you'll join us for our next show, we're going to drill down and try and find some solution sets to this problem area. I think you now understand that campaign finance, although it's a soundbite for maybe everything we don't like in politics, it's a very complicated topic. It's multifaceted, multi-layered. And if you don't really understand some of the nuances and the complexities of it all, I don't think we'll get to the point where we can understand and work together on the solutions. One of the subsets of campaign finance that came out in today's conversation is the notion of incumbency protection. The notion that our elected officials that are making the laws in campaign finance, although they make it sound as though they're doing these great and wonderful things and fixing the problem, in most cases they're not fixing the problem, and in most cases they are doing things that are going to protect their ability to stay in office. They're going to protect their ability to outraise their opponents. There are advantages that are going to be built into the system that in most cases are going to cause them to not even have opponents. So we have this whole construct, this whole topic of incumbency protection. I want to spend a few minutes talking about a few related topics today of how our elected officials, quite frankly, game the system. They are the ones that are passing the laws that are setting up the campaign finance, and they're doing it in a way that's helping to protect their positions. They do this in a number of other areas as well. So the first topic that we obviously covered today is the campaign finance. Another topic that we're going to cover in some subsequent shows is redistricting. Now, redistricting is required by the Constitution. Every 10 years there's a census, and every 10 years the population of the country shifts, and every 10 years the districts that our representatives run in also change. Obviously, Statewide elections don't change, but what we're talking about is our congressional districts, our state representative districts, our state senator districts. They're being redrawn every 10 years. Now, similar to campaign finance, the laws that are being passed to set up the new districts are being passed by the incumbents. So if you were an incumbent, what would you do? Would you draw a district that protected your seat, that made sure that the number of people that you knew were going to vote for you were in your new district, or would you want to stray from that and perhaps get to a little more neutral representation and create competition? Well, again, it's not in your self-interest to create competition. It's in your self-interest to keep your job. So you'll find that many of our elected officials are drawing maps, are doing the redistricting in a way that's, again, incumbency protection, protecting their jobs, limiting competition, limiting the number of people that would run against them. So they've limited the amount of money the opposition is going to raise, and in redistricting, they're limiting, quite frankly, whether or not someone will even run against them, depending upon the makeup of the district. Another tier of this incumbency protection relates to voter registration. Now, in another segment, we talked about the fact that the voter registration numbers in our country are very low, very low. In fact, one of the lowest voter registration totals in the world. Other countries' voter registration numbers and voting numbers are much higher than ours. So how does this happen? Well, first of all, there's a lot of people who have checked out of the system, but there's a good number of people who just find the system too difficult, too cumbersome. And this is part of what I would suggest is a systematic approach to, again, protect the incumbents and help them get reelected. If you're a Democrat, you want to have a system that's going to get the most Democrats registered. If you're a Republican, you want a system that's going to get the most Republicans registered. Or maybe if you're the Democrat and Republican working together, you want to have a system that's going to get the most people that are party members registered. You don't want the independents, though. You don't want the outliers. You don't want the people on the margin. You don't know how they're going to vote. So you make it a little more difficult to be registered, and you maybe do it in a way that's subtle, so you target populations that you know, if they did register, might want to vote for you. We're going to spend some time on some other shows, other programs drilling down on this topic, so I'm not going to go into great detail today, but again, I want to suggest that the people who are making the laws in campaign finance, in redistricting, and in voter registration that, again, is going to protect their incumbency. One more topic which we're going to see in the next segment of today's show is called ballot access. Now, this determines how hard it is to actually get on the ballot. What are the requirements to get on the ballot? And we're going to spend some time talking about ballot access throughout subsequent programs. But you'll see in our next segment, we have one of the nation's leading experts in ballot access who's going to be a regular contributor to this program. So this is the notion of incumbency protection. These are the people that are making the laws, and in making the laws, they're protecting their ability to get reelected. Again, I think it's a self-preservation issue, but we as the voters, we as the ones who don't like the dysfunction, we are the ones that don't like the polarization, we've got to come to grips with these topics, and we've got to work on solution sets to move forward and to have less dysfunction and less polarization. Our next guest is Richard Winger. Richard Winger is definitely not a household name, but he's a very important name in the world of politics. He's the nation's leading expert on ballot access. And ballot access may not sound like a sexy topic to you, but I'll tell you, ballot access is an incredibly important topic. It's an increasingly important topic because, think about it, the people that are holding office today, the incumbents, they don't want challengers, and the parties don't want challengers. They don't want people on the ballot. Surprisingly, Richard's been an expert and been doing this for how many years, Richard?
40 years.
40 years. So he's definitely ahead of his time by any stretch of imagination. And I'm going to embarrass Richard because I want to read about him from the Wikipedia site. It says, Richard Lee Winger is an American political activist and analyst. He is the publisher and editor of Ballot Access News. He sits on the editorial board of Election Law Journal. Winger publishes analysis, statistics, and legal information and supports more equitable laws allowing for access to the ballot for minor parties. Winger is regarded as an expert on ballot access and election law. Though not a lawyer, he testifies in court cases and legislative hearings and is a source for media and political organizers. He's been published in the Wall Street Journal, Journal of Election Law, the Fordham Urban Law Review, American Review of Politics, California Journal, and other publications. He's appeared as a commentator on ballot access on NBC, ABC, CNN, and NPR. Since 1985, Richard has published Ballot Access News, a monthly newsletter covering developments in ballot access law and among minority parties. Richard, I can't imagine a better lead-in. I mean, your record speaks for itself, and the fact that you are this amazing nugget of political wisdom, I just find just amazing. What got you started, and what was the impetus for all these activities?
When I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley, I was just fascinated by people who had political views that were very much in the minority. There were only 3 active minor parties that ran nationwide in the early 60s. There was the Socialist Workers' Party, which was Trotskyist, the Socialist Labor Party, which was even older, you could call it De Leonist, and the Prohibition Party. And these 3 groups were so far removed from the mainstream that I wondered how can these groups, the members, maintain their belief system? And also I wondered who are the people who are voting for these parties, because they got surprisingly large votes. So I set out to analyze the election returns. But I was a Californian, and I was frustrated because in California there were no minor parties on the ballot. But these parties were on the ballot in many other states. So I thought, that's odd. Seems to me if it's a national party, it should be on the ballot all over the country. So then I got interested in the ballot access laws, and they were so fascinating I never stopped being interested in them.
So is this a full-time occupation for you, or an avocation? Where does this fit into your life?
Well, I was lucky enough to be able to quit my day job in 1985. That's when I started Ballot Access News. That's my monthly newsletter. So it's been full-time since 1985.
And of course, I was talking to you earlier this week, and we were trying to schedule for this interview, and you said to me, I'm going to be testifying tomorrow. So talk about what it is that when you testify, and how the fact that you are respected as an expert in this topic.
Well, I'm just kind of lucky because I was so interested in election returns when I was young. I ended up getting the election returns for all federal and state office for all states for the whole 20th century. And I just couldn't help but learn a lot about what kind of ballot access laws help minor parties and what kind of ballot access laws hinder them. So I have the store of historical knowledge, plus I've researched the ballot access laws all the way back to their beginnings. So in court, sometimes it helps to have somebody who knows all that stuff, and that's what I testify about.
So you're mostly testifying about the history of ballot access when you're testifying?
Yes. Yesterday, I was deposed for Ohio. Ohio legislature last month passed a bill removing the 4 qualified minor parties from the ballot and saying if they want to be back on the ballot, they have to get 28,000 valid signatures in the next 8 months. And I had a lot of evidence that in the past, when states make the ballot access laws harder, they generally at least ease into it. They pass it, but they say, but it won't take effect for a year. Well, Ohio wants to make its new restrictions take off right away. So my role was to show that that's not normal behavior.
So, of course, Richard, I know you read my book, E-Party, and you gave me a nice plug in your newsletter. But one of the topics in E-Party is the fact that the major parties will use restrictions on either petitioning or ballot access to keep people from running for office. So what are you finding today? Is this a growing phenomenon? You meant like the Ohio legislature just wakes up one day and says, let's keep them off the ballot. What's going on here?
Well, more and more every year, minor parties and independent candidates are getting stronger. And you see the quality of people who want to run as independents or minor party nominees is improving. So the major parties are feeling more and more threatened. They were not feeling threatened much in the 80s. And then Ross Perot kind of surprised everybody, but he really was only a challenge in the presidential race. And of course, the Reform Party also won the Minnesota governorship in 1998. But generally, the Reform Party didn't offer a strong alternative to the major parties across the board in congressional races and state races. But just last year, 2 independents were elected to the U.S. Senate, one in Maine and one was reelected in Vermont. Also, in 2010, Rhode Island elected an independent governor, and the winner of the U.S. Senate race in Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, although she's still a Republican, she won on write-ins. She was not the Republican nominee. Also, last year, 25 people were elected as independents or minor party candidates to state legislatures, or governors.
Now, in most cases, are they having a higher standard to get on the ballot? Is it being much more difficult for them to get on the ballot in the first place?
Well, ballot access started out really, really easy, and it got much harder in the 30s, and it really got harder in the 60s. But since 1985, we've slowly been making gains. Overall, the ballot access laws are somewhat easier now than they were in the mid-80s. But we have had some recent setbacks, and in some states, there are recent changes that are very harmful. It's hard to generalize for the whole country.
And I know, again, you've made quite a study of this. And I don't know this, by the way. Have you written books on this topic? If someone wanted to go read one of your books, are they available somewhere?
I wrote a book, but it hasn't been published yet. It was pretty wonkish. It was written in 1997. It has all the ballot access changes for every state for all history. And I was hired to do that by the Brennan Center, and I was paid for it. But they wanted a book that had a more popular appeal, so they never published it. So I'm hoping to figure out some way to get it published.
But in the meantime, you've got your monthly newsletter. And what other communication do you put out for people who want to know more about ballot access stuff?
Well, the newsletter goes on my blog, Ballot Access News. So people who go to that site can see past issues of the printed newsletter. Plus, I blog, so when things happen, you can read that. Typically, I have 2 or 3 blog posts per day.
And then how do you compare, one last question, how do you compare what happens in the United States in terms of ballot access with what goes on around the world? Are we more restrictive, less restrictive, kind of the same?
We're just about, among countries that are considered to have free elections, we're just about the worst country in the world. I mean, I cannot understand why Americans don't pay more attention to Great Britain, our mother country, and Canada, which is our neighbor and the country that most resembles the United States. Neither Great Britain nor Canada have these problems. In Britain, you get on the ballot for House of Commons with 10 signatures and a filing fee. In Canada, you get on the ballot for their parliament with 100 signatures and a filing fee. And every candidate is treated exactly alike. Go ahead.
That's just fascinating. So in our remaining time, why don't you again remind everyone how they can find your website, get access to your ideas, and anyone who wants to drill down and get wonkish, as you called it, in the world of ballot access, what do you suggest they do?
Well, these days everybody Googles things, I think. So all you have to do is Google ballot access news. But if you want the exact address, it's ballot, and then a hyphen or a dash, whatever you call it, access.org. And all my contact information is up there.
And I am a subscriber, and if I remember correctly, you're one of the great values in Western civilization. It's just a dollar or so a month, right?
Well, for the regular subscribers, it's $16 a year for 12 issues. Sometimes I let new people on for $12 a year.
I think you charged me 16. You shouldn't have told me that.
Uh-oh. I shouldn't have told you.
Well, anyway, I think your publication is a great value. I think you are an amazing nugget of political wisdom. And for anyone who wants to become involved in politics, it's so important to understand these subtle ways in which our democratic society has become limited. So thanks for your time today, Richard, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Stephen.
Our next guest is Karen Jagoda. Karen is the president of eVoter Institute and the host of Digital Politics Radio. She's joining us every week to educate people on how to use this internet, this amazing democratic tool to advance causes and candidacies and issue development. Today she's going to talk about targeting online ads. So Karen, what do you want us to know about targeting online ads?
Howdy, Steve. Well, today I really wanted to emphasize how important online ads are for both persuasion and for calls to action. We see so many online ads for consumer products and for services, and political online ads can get attention. And the real key about targeting online ads is understanding who your audience is. And that's where this whole idea of big data is coming in, and finding your supporters through research that these big data companies have come up with in order to find behavioral characteristics that may be predictive of how candidates would appeal to a particular kind of voter. We've learned a lot more about voter behavior recently, and this whole world of online ad targeting is really just starting to reveal itself and how powerful it can be. So when you put a TV ad out there and a child is watching the ad, or someone gets up to get something out of the refrigerator, no, they're not watching your political ad on TV. You're wasting your money. If you do the political ads online targeted to people where they're most likely to see the ad at a day part, when they're most likely to be receptive to the ad, you can really get a lot more bang for your buck. And a lot of the companies I've had on the digitalpoliticsradio.com show have gone into this world in a very big way. One of the companies I've talked with over the years is Rocket Fuel. They're very big on big data and data mining. The folks at Resonate Insights have also gotten very involved in data mining and figuring out what emotional appeals people have that can be kind of used in a political campaign to get people's attention or to get them to vote for a particular candidate or cause. I've also talked with folks on both the left and the right. Targeted Victory, a big group there in Washington, D.C., worked for Mitt Romney, have worked for a lot of Republican candidates, and they're very keyed into targeting online ads to specific audiences. Also, Bully Pulpit in Washington worked for the Obama team. Big time online targeting, online ads used in a way that are very effective and really communicate a message to people who need to hear the message and will respond to the message. So the idea of sort of just throwing money against the wall when they're doing TV ads is really a problem when we think about how to use this really hard to come by campaign money. So I really want folks to think hard about using online ads, finding an agency, going to even Google and figuring out how to do some online ad buying, go to Facebook, buy online ads, but really do some experimenting and do some message testing and figure out where the message is most resonating and who it's resonating with, and get more bang for the buck that you're working so hard to raise.
Yeah, and thanks, Karen. We just have a few seconds remaining, but the point here is all these tools you talked about and are used by Obama and Romney, et cetera, these are tools that can be taken by local interest groups, local candidates, small, tiny campaigns and issues, and all these same tools apply to those groups as well.
Absolutely. And the key here is knowing who your supporters are and targeting those ads to those people, not just putting out ads that people who can or won't vote for you see. So absolutely, you can do it on your own. You can work with an agency. You can learn and experiment, and it's not very expensive, and it can really be very effective for a local and state campaign.
Karen, as always, thank you for your great insight. And for those looking to find you at eVoter Institute and Digital Politics Radio. Thank you again.
Thanks, Stephen.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. We hope you were entertained and we hope you were educated. For those of you that have been with us before, you know that we close each program with a homework assignment. Don't worry, you're not going to be graded, but if you do your homework, I think you're going to get more involved in the political process, and you're going to become a better citizen, and you're going to help us break through this cycle of dysfunction and polarization. Last time's homework assignment was to try and get registered to vote. For those of you that weren't registered to vote, please do so. I hope whether you've been registered, I hope you've at least started the process of finding out how you get registered for vote, where you go to vote, and how that happens. And I also mentioned last time, for those of you that have children that are not registered to vote, I hope you've started to take steps to get them involved in the process. Once you're on the path of registering, you're on the path of voting, you're on the path to citizenship, you're on the path to help us solve some problems. If you found any difficulties in registering, or if you have any comments, we ask you to let us know what you found, or perhaps you had a great experience and you want us to know that as well. We can be reached at info@noneoftheabove.us, info@noneoftheabove.us. Now for today's homework assignment, what I'd like you to do is find out who represents you. Who's your state senator? Who's your state representative? Who's your congressperson? Who's your U.S. senator? Find out who your representatives are. Shouldn't be too hard to do. I'm guessing they all have websites that are pretty active. I'm guessing you can probably go to Ballotpedia, one of the sources that we've recommended to you on other shows. Go to your state on Ballotpedia and find out who represents you. When you get there and you find out who represents you, write down the contact information. In later shows, quite frankly, I'm going to push you to contact your representatives. I'm going to push you to contact your elected officials. I'm going to push you to get involved in issues. So write down that information now. You're going to find it, it's going to come in handy, and you're going to use it. So again, find out who your elected officials are, find out their contact information, get their phone numbers, get their websites, get their Facebook pages, get that information, put it down on a piece of paper, keep it handy. Always remember, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem.